Utility creation on Cardano is represented by the Goguen era. At the time of this recording, smart contracts on Cardano Plutus have been available for 30 hours. And with me today is a group of the third parties who are utilizing our smart contracts to build applications such as DeFi projects, asset creations, and interoperability solutions to bring Cardano into mass markets. Let's hear from them their views on how to be a Plutus developer, as well as the growing environment to lower the barriers of entry for other smart contract developers.
Yeah, hello. So my name is Sebastian. So I'm CTO and co-founder of DC Spark. I've been involved in the Cardano ecosystem for about 3.5 years now, where I was previously co-VP of engineering at Emergo. So I have a lot of experience working with different companies in the Cardano ecosystem and working with the IOSK team on projects such as Plutus and the Alonso hard fork.
Great. And then can you kick us off on this panel and introduce the panelists?
Yeah, all right. So let's go take turn by turn, just a brief introduction. So let's start with Pi then. Pi is from Sundae Swap, where he, I believe, is the CIO there.
Hi, yeah. I'm Pi, like you mentioned. That is like the number. At Sundae Swap, we're building a decentralized exchange that is trying to serve the very kind of core DeFi need of somebody with one token that needs another token.
All right, next we're going to have Ben Hart, who is the Director of Cardano Operations at MLabs.
Yeah, hi, I'm Ben. I have been sort of part of the MLabs journey into Plutus over the last 8 months, and have worked extensively with Dwayne as well as with Pi on their applications, as well as a number of other applications with CardStarter and with Ardana and Giro as well, just to name a few. So I'm getting sort of a lot of breadth across a bunch of different applications in my experience of Plutus.
All right, so next we're going to have Ilya, who's the core developer of ErgoDex.
Hey, I'm Ilya Oskin. I'm core developer of ErgoDex. ErgoDex is a non-custodial decentralized exchange, which combines a wide range of tools for trading, from constant function market makers to limit orders.
All right, and lastly, we're going to have Dwayne here, who's from Liqwid Finance.
Hey everyone, I'm Dwayne Cameron. I'm the co-founder of Liqwid. I've been in Cardano space since early 2018, really. I've joined the Catalyst project since the start and have been a part of the coming of decentralized governance to the Cardano blockchain. Worked closely with MLabs and Ben's team to bring Liqwid as a decentralized and non-custodial lending protocol and really a DeFi banking stack to the Cardano users. Thank you.
All right, awesome. So great to have an introduction from all of you. So the first thing I want to talk about is your experience coming into the Plutus ecosystem. Now, the thing is that all of you come from different backgrounds, and so it'd be great to hear your experience coming into the Plutus ecosystem. You're all pioneers. You all started on these projects before Plutus was available on the mainnet, so we'd love to hear your experience. I'd like to hear first from Ben Hart. Your company works a lot on with Haskell developers. A lot of your developers in your company came from Haskell experience and then came in to learn Plutus. So could you tell us a bit more about how your employees have handled the transition?
Sure. Prior to our launch into working in Plutus products, we've worked extensively in fairly traditional finance Haskell applications. And I will say, like, Haskell and Plutus have sort of an interesting relationship because of the way the Plutus ecosystem is built around many of the concepts that already existed in Haskell. And even prior to Plutus, it was really common for Haskellers to sort of swap out a lot of what other languages would consider sort of the base library. So doing the same thing for Plutus, certainly it brings some interesting aspects to the process with the UTXO model and some challenges, but by and large, I think a capable Haskell developer has a pretty smooth transition to becoming a capable Plutus developer.
Awesome. So another thing that people may not know is that Cardano uses a different model from Ethereum. It uses something called the EUTXO model, which is a different way of handling transactions, different way of handling smart contracts, which comes with a whole different set of trade-offs. Now, Cardano is not the first blockchain to have this functionality. Ergo was also a UTXO-based blockchain, and Ilya here worked on Ergo, and so I'd love to hear his experience of transitioning from Ergo script, which works slightly differently from Plutus, and how is the transition over from Ergo script to Plutus?
Yeah, mostly our developers are from Ergo, and we've been developing decentralized applications on top of Ergo, which is also utilizes extended UTXO model. So for us, transition was more like learning Plutus specifics, learning Plutus software development kit, and most of conceptions which are used in Cardano were familiar to us already.
Awesome.
So yeah, it was like smooth transition.
All right, so great to hear that for Haskell developers and UTXO developers, you already have a smooth onboarding experience. Next, I'd like to hear from Pi. I believe you folks had, some crypto background, but more general crypto. So how's your experience kind of transitioning into Plutus development?
Yeah, so I'll answer that question kind of first for myself and then for my team. I really was just a Haskell dabbler for the last 10 years. I've written, a fluid simulator and a little kind of crypto trading bot, but nothing any kind of serious in Haskell. And so the transition for me was pretty seamless because I didn't have a lot to unlearn. Similar answer for my team. Mostly switching from Haskell to Plutus is just some compiler flags and some kind of wrapper code for the template Haskell bits. The hardest bits have been the transition from kind of an Ethereum or imperative design pattern to the design patterns that work better on Cardano. Things like dealing with concurrency as the big boogeyman is out there in the space, and kind of building that into your design rather than relying on the fact that Ethereum transactions are 100% serialized.
All right, so how would you say the experience from Ethereum developer experience to Plutus developer experience? Do you feel like this is something that a lot of Solidity developers can tackle on and can join the Cardano ecosystem?
Yeah, I think if you have experience with functional programming, it's definitely going to be a lot easier. The biggest shift there from kind of Solidity to Cardano or to Plutus is going to be kind of reframing a problem from a sequence of steps to a description of the problem that kind of decomposes along functional boundaries.
All right, awesome. And next I'd like to hear from Dwayne. So Dwayne, you've been part of the Cardano ecosystem for a very long time. So could you talk about your experience going from a kind of community member to somebody who went through the Plutus Pioneer program, learned the development tools, and kind of started a company?
Yeah, absolutely. When I joined Cardano, I was just in my first year at MFR Consultants and working with, different software development firms that, we partner with to build basically government level applications and systems. Joining into the Cardano, DeFi and decentralized application development space was kind of a natural transition from my day job project product, manager role. I definitely agree with a lot that Pi just mentioned on the differences of the Solidity and Ethereum paradigm moving into the Plutus paradigm and what that represents from a composability standpoint, from a transaction ordering, or this concept of a contract calling another contract, right? Like, how can you make those things functional in the same way that a end user would experience them in Ethereum DeFi protocols in the Cardano Plutus realm that we're coming upon now. So I think that was actually the biggest hurdle that starting Liqwid and really doing our due diligence and looking at Aave and Compound, all the other lending protocols that had been built out on Ethereum, reverse engineering their models, their formulas, and really trying to understand them at a technical specification level. It was really a serendipitous meeting with the MLabs team because we brought so much on the product management, on the simulation, and really on the development of the actual real DAO and community formation. And MLabs really brought so much Haskell and just core technical chops that it was a match made in heaven for the most part. But yeah, I do agree with Pi's point there. The biggest hurdle or shift, if you will, is going to be kind of thinking of the Plutus paradigm and how to make things that you would do in the Ethereum world work seamlessly for your users in this kind of new model.
All right, so great to hear that all four of you kind of came from different backgrounds, but you all have successful companies in the Cardano ecosystem. So hopefully this gives confidence to anybody watching this that you too can come join the Cardano ecosystem regardless of your background. It's possibly for you to succeed. Now, one thing I think is interesting is all four of you, your companies are kind of dependent on other people also building on Cardano, right? So be it through, MLabs having other projects come in and contract work with you, or be it, liquidity providers, you provide liquidity for tokens or swaps for tokens. So I'd love to hear about kind of your thoughts, because I'm sure all of you are reaching out to projects that are building on the Cardano ecosystem and trying to get them to onboard onto your protocol to bring users and utility. So I'd love to hear kind of your experience on this. So first, let's start with Ilya. How are you reaching out to other projects in the Cardano ecosystem to onboard onto your protocol? And what kind of projects do you see out there, and what kind of projects do you expect to come in the future?
Well, I guess that other projects ErgoDex can interact with are projects like decentralized stablecoins. They can provide liquidity to our decentralized exchange. For that purpose, we are building software development kits that would allow other developers to build on top of ErgoDex easily.
All right, awesome. Next, I'd like to hear from Dwayne on this topic.
Yeah, absolutely. I think composability has always been kind of the name of the game. When you look at where Ethereum DeFi is today, it's not a result of just MakerDAO or Aave alone. It's the products and protocols that are built on top of them that draw liquidity from both these systems to create new functionality essentially. So it's something we thought about from day one, really. We've partnered with Sundae Swap for our main DEX liquidity venue for launching Liqwid, but beyond that, there's this concept of working with the Ardanas, the stablecoin DEXs of the world, working with the Indigos, the synthetic assets of the world, because really at the end of the day, all of these DeFi protocols are creating some sort of liquidity that can be drawn and used in another protocol pretty seamlessly. When you look at Cardano's native assets, it's very simple and almost trivial to mint a stable coin in Ardana and then supply that as liquidity in Liqwid, right? The same thing goes for synthetic assets and assets on Indigo. So that's kind of how we start to think of, okay, how do we get additional liquidity and allow those tokens being minted on those protocols to have markets on Liqwid so they can be supplied and borrowed against. Yeah.
Awesome. Next, I'd like to hear from Ben. It'd be great to hear about, what kind of companies are reaching out to MLabs. Do you see any trend in upcoming projects in Cardano?
I mean, certainly we're seeing a continuance of the ongoing DeFi and NFT booms. I don't think that should be a surprise to anyone. In terms of sort of new and interesting projects beyond the DeFi space, I think there's a lot of really interesting movements in terms of partial NFT ownership and potentially some movement around sort of what the kind of layer around. Once you have sort of your lending platforms and your DEXs, you have another layer of DeFi that you can build on top of that. And so sort of the early derivative protocols, the early investment mechanisms that you can enable once you have that first layer. Those are sort of the ideas that we're seeing come our way. I think that would be sort of the main highlights of the pitches that we hear. Yeah.
Awesome. And next, I'd like to hear from Pi. So what kind of projects are reaching out to Sundae Swap to get, listing? Are you reaching out to projects? How is that whole process going on?
Yeah. So the way I like to think of it is none of us are a village, right? And one of the things that we're trying to do at Sundae Swap is create the most interconnected and kind of cooperative Cardano ecosystem we can. And I've said that in kind of a number of interviews now. And so we realized that very early on, and we started reaching out kind of and pursuing these partnerships aggressively with CardStarter, Liqwid, Indigo, a bunch more that haven't been announced now, and I don't know if they're going to be announced by the summit or not. But we're really just trying to establish those partnerships, both from, a DEX is only as valuable as the liquidity that's on it. And so finding tokens that want to launch and want to provide tokens to our DEX, but also interconnections and cooperation between them. So for example, we're going to be building an Oracle price feed to feed into the liquid lending markets. And, their Indigo is going to be building a separate front end to the Sundae Swap protocol for their kind of synthetic assets. And kind of just all of this interconnection and that we can cultivate creates both a more decentralized Sundae Swap, but also a richer Cardano ecosystem overall.
All right, awesome. Next, I'd like to talk about, auditability of smart contracts, and correctness of smart contracts. So one of the big benefits of using Haskell for the programming language for Plutus smart contracts was that you can kind of leverage the Haskell tooling for correctness, and you can also obviously use the Haskell types to make sure that you get, strongly typed language and make sure that no settled bugs get introduced that way. So I'd love to hear first from Ben about your experience, reusing any existing tooling from the Haskell ecosystem and how you've been able to leverage those to ensure any amount of correctness of the smart contracts that you've been working on.
Yeah, I think certainly beyond the Haskell compiler itself, which gives you so many correctness guarantees out of the box, the next biggest and most important tool would almost certainly be property testing libraries and other tools that you can use for formal verification and getting more secure sort of claims of operability within the spec. So for property testing for the uninitiated, you would use a library like QuickCheck, and you can express ways to generate meaningful data, and your test cases are actually generated for you at random. So this way you can test, not just does 1 + 1 = 2, but does addition work for sort of a bunch of integers that maybe you've chosen out specifically that could be edge cases. So it really allows you to have a good amount of security. It's sort of second to a mathematical proof, but it's pretty good. So that I would say that's one of the strongest tools, and certainly there's sort of variations on QuickCheck. But yeah, I would say that's going to give you one of the strongest guarantees about your contract's operability that you can get.
All right, awesome. Next, I'd like to hear from Ilya on this topic. So obviously, ErgoScript has kind of a more simple programming language. ErgoScript is much more concise in a sense, and that makes it kind of easier to prove the steps. How have you found the transition to Plutus, where you have to kind of grow into the more general Haskell ecosystem and leverage the more stronger but more general functionality there?
Yeah, I guess actually Plutus and ErgoScript are very similar in their approaches. They use both Plutus and ErgoScript are functional languages, strongly typed. So strong types themselves gives a good level of auditability. The compiler can help you a lot not to do mistakes. What I really like in Plutus in comparison with ErgoScript is that nevertheless Plutus is a relatively young tool. But it has it inherits already matured tooling from Haskell, and that's good for developers.
All right, awesome. Next, I'd like to hear from Dwayne. How are you guys ensuring the correctness of your protocol, and how's your experience with that?
Yeah, I think as Ben said, on the property-based testing side, QuickCheck is something that we're making great use of. Right now, we have at least 1 to 2 devs working on Liqwid and Liqwid USD only. QuickCheck, testing all of our contract code, coming up with new test cases. I believe right now, IOHK and runtime verification devs are also using some QuickCheck tools on the Liqwid contracts. So In addition to that, we've pretty much at this point really gone down the road of saying this protocol needs to go through not only our internal testing, continuous testing, quick check testing, independent protocol security audits need to happen before this thing sees the light of mainnet. And that's for Liqwid, Liqwid USD, all the same. And that's a company called Twig that we've partnered with to do that independent audit. They're well known in the Cardano space. And Manuel Chakravarty and his team were a part of the original Plutus architects. So yeah, we feel really confident in the actual independent security audit that's coming down the road for both of these protocols before they go live.
All right, awesome. Next, I'd like to hear from Pi. How's your experience been trying to check for correctness of your code in the Plutus ecosystem?
Yeah, in addition to everything that other people on the panel have mentioned, which were all great answers, I wanted to kind of call out the core design of the EUTXO model also helps with reasoning about the code. And what I mean by that is in Ethereum, because all contracts are serialized and because you don't necessarily know what the latest state of the blockchain is going to be when your transaction settles, you kind of, when you put your signature to a transaction, you're giving up a little bit of control. You're saying, whatever this smart contract decides to do, I'm agreeing to. And so a huge amount of the smart contract code has to be checking the state of the blockchain to make sure that it's still operating in your best interest, right? Oh, maybe the price on Uniswap has moved too much and it needs to abort the transaction. But with EUTXO, things are way more deterministic. And so a lot of that checking code goes away. And you're really just writing code that boils down to a true-false statement about whether funds can be spent. And that is a much smaller surface area and a much... there are much less moving parts to kind of have to reason about, and thus less surface area for rusting or bugs or hacks. And so, instead of worrying about, oh, if my contract calls into another one and that happens to call back into mine and there's reentrancy errors and all this kind of stuff, it's really just this true-false function to decide, can the funds be spent or not? And that's a way easier to reason about. It's not necessarily a silver bullet, but it helps quite a bit.
Very awesome. So it seems like everybody's had a good experience with trying to verify the correctness of their, Plutus code. So it's great to hear that, one of the main goals of the Cardano ecosystem was being able to empower developers to write code and smart contracts that are easy to check. And it's great to hear that everybody is being able to succeed in that. Now, obviously, as we mentioned, we have all these tools already available through inheriting tooling from the Haskell ecosystem. But as Plutus is a new programming language, newly released, there's a lot of tools that are still missing that would help improve the smart contract developer experience. Now, I'm sure a lot of you here are writing your own tools for your specific purposes, and probably all of you here have tools you would like to exist but aren't quite written yet, and you don't have kind of the bandwidth to take that onto yourselves. So I'd love to hear about, what kind of tools that you're contributing back to the Cardano ecosystem, if there is one, and also, what kind of tools you would love for somebody to create, but you don't have the bandwidth to support yourself. So let's start with Pi on that.
Yeah, thanks for the question. So like I've said before, one of the things we really believe in at Sundae Swap is giving back to the Cardano community and creating that kind of interconnected community. So one of the tools that we built for ourselves that we've now open sourced is called Toolkit for Cardano. And it's basically a set of Docker and AMI images to spin up a private testnet, private Cardano testnet in AWS. And so you can create those in, I think, as little as 4 minutes and have an Alonzo testnet. And then we built kind of a GraphQL and UI front end for doing kind of some simple things like, creating some wallets, giving yourself some ADA, minting new tokens, kind of looking at what the UTXOs attached to a specific wallet are. And so we'll continue to expand that kind of as we build out capabilities there. This last weekend, I added the ability to take one of those wallets and register the staking address against the stake pool and things like that. In terms of tools that I would love to see, actually, I just spent last night going through one of our smart contracts and disabling line by line and rerunning it and calculating kind of the cost to see which lines were contributing to the cost of a smart contract. And that was really tedious. So I would love to see someone build some kind of profiling interpreter for the virtual machine that runs under Plutus to tell you which portions of your code are consuming or contributing to large portions of your execution units. Because obviously the cost of smart contracts is really important.
All right, awesome. Next, I'd like to talk with Ilya. So what kind of tools are you building, and what kind of tools would you love there to exist to help you with your smart contract?
Yeah, we also are building SDKs for Plutus in order to work it more conveniently. And as for what I'd like to see in the future is the kind of a framework allowing to work with Plutus contracts with templates. Like, maybe in ErgoScript, you have a script template. You can take this template and of already compiled contract and just set particular constants on it and use it in your transactions right away. So this would make work for front-end developers which have to interact with Plutus contracts much easier, I guess. And that's what is missing on the front-end side of ErgoDex implementation in particular.
All right, awesome. Next, let's hear from Dwayne. What kind of tooling are you working on, and what would you love for there to exist?
Yeah, absolutely. A few months ago, we released Plutus Extra, which is a useful set of helper functions and data structures that I think Ben can expand on, but any Haskell dev who's new to Plutus could pick up and run with to get started on their Plutus application that they're working on. We also have a Liqwid SDK in development. It's a JavaScript SDK that allows non-Haskell devs essentially to interact and build on top of our protocol. We're also, as our last Catalyst grant funding, building a DeFi SDK entirely in Plutus that will allow not even Liqwid devs, but a dev from maybe Ergo or Sundae Swap to query account balances across different DeFi protocols, kind of like maintaining a registry of different Cardano Plutus DeFi protocols and the contracts that they use for assets and liabilities in their system. In terms of tools that we'd love to see, I think Pi brought up a great point. More tools to model execution cost in our contracts would be really helpful. Also, shout out to Ergo. They have this UTXO read-only concept that makes Oracle pools really a nice way to handle the Oracle problem in Ergo, and would love to see something like that make its way into Cardano in time. I think that would be a really powerful tool.
All right, awesome. And lastly, let's hear from Ben on this topic.
Yeah, so as Dwayne mentioned, there is Plutus Extra, which with Liqwid Labs we've open sourced, and that's more like fundamental building blocks. I think in the near future, what I would love to see is sort of a vast improvement to the testing part of the ecosystem. Certainly, the tools that are needed are there, but we could definitely do a whole lot better as the ecosystem matures. So one example in particular is there's a scripting language that's kind of built into the Plutus application back end that's for scripting sort of simulated transactions, and it would be great if there was a version of that that could be used against a real chain so that we could simulate interactions on a real chain as well. So that's just one example, but I would say the testing libraries can certainly expand as the community matures, and as the node is now complete, hopefully we can see some of these off-chain tools evolve.
Yeah, so one thing I'd be kind of interested to know, so obviously Plutus uses Haskell as this core programming language. Now, one thing that Haskell is good at is creating DSLs. So you can essentially use use Haskell to create languages on top of it. And that's how Plutus was created. That's how Marlowe was created. And obviously anybody else can write their own DSLs for their own purposes. I'd love to hear your opinions on DSLs. If any of you are working on DSLs, what kind of DSLs you would like to exist that might make your life easier. Maybe Ben, because you kind of touched on that point a bit, if you could start with that.
Yeah, I mean, what I described is a DSL. Most of what MLabs actually worked on before Plutus was crafting custom DSLs. I would say, like, any place where if you're a library, if you're a developer who hasn't been working in Haskell, where you would think, I really need a library to do this, Haskell's answer to that is probably a DSL. It's that common of a solution. So one of the nice things about DSLs is they're structured in such a way where it's harder to use them wrong than arbitrary functions in a library. They're usually correct by construction. So it helps you only kind of formulate the things that make sense in that language. It's kind of what separates it out from some arbitrary function in a library somewhere. As for what I'd like to see, I mean, I think I touched on my key one, is I'd really like to see a DSL for calling contracts on chain in a reliable way. I think especially if you're setting up a demonstration of your application, there's a good amount of setup that I wish that could just be automated at this point, and hopefully in the near future it will be. Yeah.
All right, awesome. And so maybe Pi, Dwayne, or Ilya, if any of you are working on a domain-specific language or have one you would like to exist, maybe if you could touch on that.
Yeah. So one of the benefits of a domain-specific language, kind of like Ben touched on, but I'll kind of elaborate on, is that they take this space of every possible program and they carve off lots of large chunks of it. And they limit it to kind of some very specific set of programs that you can write. So you can't go write Flappy Bird in some specific DSL, but by making that surface area smaller and removing capabilities, you're able to reason a lot stronger about those capabilities that are left. Right, so we see that with Marlowe and stuff. And so, you know, one of the DSLs that we're building internally, we're not it's not a full DSL, something that right now we would be able to open source. But, you know, to Ben's point, we're building a kind of small unit testing DSL, right? So going in the other direction from what Ben mentioned, you know, the PAB tests often run very slow, and the code around your validators, the actual smart contracts, is often much faster. And so testing those in isolation, we're writing a small DSL to be able to say, oh, okay, you know, these are the conditions, you know, in these circumstances, you should be able to, the validator should return true. In these circumstances, the validator should return false, things like that.
Yeah, I'll jump in here. I think I kind of take a different spin on DSLs coming from like a more product background, where I see DSLs as like an enabler for non-devs to start building meaningful applications or smart contracts on top of the blockchain, right? And you see what Marlowe's doing, you see the Blockly tool, you see how that can enable simple contracts, you know, landlord and renter type of agreements to be handled at the level of just a script, basically, right? And I think the next DSLs that come to Cardano, you think about Atala Prism and decentralized identity. A DSL for identity would be massive. If it's interoperable with Prism, you know, all the better, because then you have a true system that allows a non-Haskell developer or non-JavaScript dev to pick up Atala Prism potentially, right? And also pick up this DSL for identity and build a composable product, if you will, that they can actually, you know, use without having a developer have to build it for them, essentially. I also think about DSLs for things like insurance, DSLs for things like law and legal contracts. You look at open law and Ethereum and what they've done. I think there's a real design space and a real demand for non-developers who want to be able to, you know, build correct smart contracts that they can actually do functional things with in their specific domain that they're an expert in. So I think DSLs will have a large, you know, future in the Cardano ecosystem, definitely.
Yeah, and another kind of DSLs I'd consider building on top of Plutus is a DSL that would allow to partially hide the complexity of UTXO that decentralized application developers had to keep in mind always, all these state transitions, in order to make audit of smart contracts available for as wide range of community developers as possible, so they can make a community audit of smart contracts.
Very awesome. I think, Ben, you want to add one last point on this topic?
Yep. I think the DSL that most people, even some non-developers, would be familiar with is SQL. And like that on its own might be a really useful DSL that may exist in the Cardano ecosystem one day. Would be some sort of a query language to help people query UTXOs at a given address. These sorts of things would be, I think, really useful to the community as a whole.
Yeah, and definitely that kind of tooling is in the works because we need those for light wallets as well. So from a light wallet, you don't have access to the full blockchain state. The only way you can have any hope of providing, light wallet smart contract functionality is through tooling like this. You can query UTXOs for different smart contract that fit specific criteria. And there has been work on this topic, but it's in the works. Speaking of things in the works, as a final question, as you know, this is the first version of Plutus. Some features we have already exist. Some features were not included in the first release. Could we just very quickly, if you could add one feature to Plutus for the next hard fork, which is Babbage, what would you add? We're kind of wrapping up, so just if you have anything, time to add.
String concat.
Read-only UTXOs.
Yeah, read inputs, number one.
I'm also voting for read-only UTXOs.
Right, the developers have spoken. So this is something that IRHK is definitely looking into. We've written on this topic as well at DC Spark, so we've written quite a lot about read-only inputs. We've talked to people at IRHK on this topic. There are trade-offs on this thing. You don't get them for free. It does come out with trade-offs in the language, but I'm sure IRHK will have more to say on this topic. All right, so thank you very much, everybody, for making the time to come on this panel. It's a great discussion about your different experiences for your different companies coming onto the Plutus platform, talking about what kind of features you would love to have, what kind of features and tooling that you've created, and what you've used and your experience with that. So I think we had a really good overall discussion, and thank you everybody for listening in.